we're going to go behind the scenes with this book, Queenie of Norwich. Growing up, Queenie's story was legendary in my family. I knew her as Queenie Nanny, and it wasn't until I was in my teens before I found out our true relationship. So, Queenie was my great aunt. She was the aunt of my grandmother Barbara, but she raised Barbara as her daughter. If you're still following, well done. But I used to go and visit Queenie when I was little. My mum used to take me to her sheltered housing she lived in, and she would tell her stories. I remember very random stories about Queenie, like her saying she cut her eyelashes because she thought they were too long, and lots of other random stories like that. But it was the story about her being sold when she was 6 years old to the fair that really stuck with me. I knew I always wanted to write a book about it. But my brother and sister are also very talented writers. So before I embarked on this book, I checked that they were happy for me to write it and they didn't want to tell the story themselves. They gave me the thumbs up, so I got started with the research. I very quickly realised that I would need to tell this story in 3 parts to represent the 3 names Queenie had over her life: Ellen Hardy, Nellie Westrop and Queenie Reid. Let's start at the beginning with Ellen. I found all sorts of information about Ellen using Ancestry predominantly. I'm sure most of you will have come across Ancestry. It's absolutely brilliant. The census records in particular gave me a real structure to her early life. I found out about all these siblings I didn't know existed, where they were living in Queen Caroline's yard, the occupations of her mum and dad. And then once I knew that and where she lived, I needed to get a sense of what it was actually like to live in the Norwich Yards in 1900. And for that, I used this incredible book, The Old Courts and Yards of Norwich, A Story of People, Poverty and Pride by Francis and Michael Holmes. If you want to know anything about Old Norwich, this is the book. Sorry about the reflection. And they also have an excellent website where there are videos of people from the yards talking about their experiences. So that's well worth looking up. And that really painted a vivid picture of what life was like for young Ellen. In that early section of the book, Ellen's life, much of what happened is true. A lot came from the horse's mouth. So, for example, when Queenie had the 100-day cough and choked on a piece of bread, that really happened. Other stories like Sarah's wedding came from the research I'd done on Ancestry. Now we move on to the second part of Queenie's life when she became Nellie Westrop. Now this was harder to write because all we knew was that Queenie, Ellen, had been sent to wait on the corner of a street for a lady called Julia, who then took her to the travelling fair, having bought her. We didn't know Julia's last name or what she'd done at the fair. So this then involved quite laborious historical detective work using the British newspaper archives and Ancestry. And what I did was look through the newspapers to find what fair was in Norwich in 1906. Once I'd identified the fair, I then went through and noted down every stall or ride at the fair and the names of the owners of those stalls and rides. Then I took those names and cross-referenced them with Ancestry. And eventually I found that Henry Westrop of Westrop Shooting Gallery was married to a lady called Julia. And then I found the census that made me scream because they were listed as having a daughter called Nellie Westrop, the right age. Nellie is a variation of Ellen. I actually screamed the house down and terrified my family, running around saying, I found them. And it was such a breakthrough because once I had got the names, then I could go back to the British newspaper archive and track the progress of Westrop Shooting Gallery around the east coast of England between 1906 and 1914, when Henry unfortunately died. And through those reports came a load of the stories that you find in the book, such as the religious group having their flag flying over the fair. That was reported in the newspapers. The accident at the Beccles Fair. So although we didn't necessarily have Queenie's stories for that part of her life, that's where the newspaper archives filled in the blanks. So that was extremely exciting. Also, 2 books that really helped: The Travelling People by Duncan Dallas and Show Folk by Frank Bruce. They really helped kind of paint that picture of fairground life. Now we come on to the third part of Queenie's life, when she became Queenie Reid, and she met and married this handsome fellow here, Barney. Hopefully you can, yeah, sorry about the light. This photo actually came from the niece and nephew of Barney Reid, who I didn't know anything about until they saw an article in the newspaper about Queenie of Norwich, read the book, got in touch with me, and then we met up and they gave me this photo, which I absolutely treasure. Queenie always told the story of how she had been involved in a betting raid and she had escaped, and it had been reported in the paper that people were arrested, the Queen Bee escaped, and she then became known forevermore as Queenie. Now, I've searched and searched and searched through the newspaper archives and I have not been able to find that newspaper report, but she was adamant about that during her lifetime, so I'm taking that as true. When it came to the finding out what life was like in that gambling world, I again relied on newspaper reports because there were a lot of reports of raids on betting shops at that time, and also the stories she had told. And my aunt could remember a lot of stories from Queenie. So that was really how I built the picture of that part of her life. Things like having the heart-shaped womb was something she'd spoken about. How she went about adopting Barbara, that was a lot of those conversations, and the way parts of that part of her life happened came from my imagination. I knew the basic facts, but I had to fill in the blanks. So I knew when Florrie had died from the ancestry records, but I didn't really know how. All I knew was that Barbara hadn't had any further contact with her dad Joe, so I filled in the blanks with my imagination. So that's a whistle-stop tour behind the scenes of the book. People often wonder why I ended it where I did, and it was because I wanted Queenie's story to end on a note of triumph. And later in her life, she went through further heartbreaks, such as losing Barney, losing Barbara when Barbara was very young. And because Barbara had 2 young children at the time, the repercussions of those events still can be felt in our family today, and it felt like I would have been straying into our current family life, which I didn't want to fictionalise. But needless to say, Queenie did continue to live a colourful life right up until the end. There were other men in her life after Barney, and she remained Queenie to the last. So I hope you've enjoyed that quick look behind the scenes of the book. If you have any other questions you'd like me to answer, please let me know in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. If you enjoy hearing about the background to some of these books and you'd like more, then please subscribe because it really helps me out. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed the video.